Hey guys, so we're going to be doing session 2, the next part of this week, really focusing on getting started with your inquiry project, which is where we kind of left off. We talked about the relationship between writing and research and kind of used that to begin talking about what we're going to be doing with your inquiry project. And the inquiry project is made up of 2 assignments, an annotated bibliography, and your digital essay. We won't be starting the annotated bibliography until after this unit. What we're doing with this unit is just talking about inquiry, some habits of research to get you started, doing some brainstorming and trying to nail down what your inquiry topic is going to be. So the work we're doing this week, as well as with Studio One, which we're going to go over in a little bit, is all getting started collaborating and brainstorming and thinking about what your inquiry topic could be. So we're going to start by just going over a little bit about what inquiry is. First thing that we're going to kind of talk about is we're kind of thinking about how to differentiate, I guess, like traditional, like classroom research, and also talking about the kinds of research we might typically do on our own, and then also the kind of research that we're going to do, which is inquiry. And inquiry is a little bit different. We're going to start just with like a research paper like you might write for class. So typically first you pick your topic, right? You might even write your thesis statement first so that you have a focus. Then you know what your thesis statement is. You know you want what the paper's supposed to like show or talk about. So then you go and you find sources that fit that. Then you read the sources. Maybe. Most likely you're doing something, especially if the paper is like due tomorrow, you're doing something that I call quote mining, where you actually, like, you're just looking through the source, looking for like the good quotes and the good statistics that like back up what you're saying and make you look right. And if you're doing the 5-paragraph essay, which you may be kind of using that go-to formula, or you already have your outline, you're just kind of like plugging the stuff that you're like skimming for into your paper, and then you just sort of write a paper around that, I guess. And a lot of people have, you go through this method. It's a pretty popular way to do it for a class, because you've got, like, you have an assignment and you have a couple of days to do it, had a couple weeks to do it, and you're starting at the last minute, or maybe you were just assigned that paper. And I think that's what a lot of us run into, especially for classroom research, is it's typically different than the way you might think of research happening anywhere else. Again, back to that like simulated experience, like you have a deadline. So a lot of times going out and doing a lot of research, or the level of research you might expect like an expert to do, or someone who's going to write something to get it published, you might not have that kind of time. And if you're not already an expert on the subject, that makes another issue, because there's really not time to go out and like become an expert or read what you need to be well versed on the issue. The problem with that is that there really wasn't anything learned, I guess, like not just about the issue itself, but really about like research skills. Like every time you sit down to do real research, you should figure out something new. Like there's so many levels and so much depth to doing good research. And it's really difficult to push those skills if you're always in a rush and using like go-to things and you never try anything new. You're also getting, I mean, honestly, like biased research. If you're starting with a thesis statement, you're starting with the point you want the paper to make, and then you're invested in having that research back up that point regardless. And that is the definition of being biased. Especially if you're skimming through, you're kind of looking for things that just support what you have to say. You're not really hearing everybody out. You're not getting a well-rounded set of data. And that's kind of bias with a big B. I kind of think about it as like bias with a big B versus a little b. Like bias with a little b is the kind of bias that like everybody has and is kind of in everything. Like when you read everything, like anything you read, the writer has their own like little like values and quirks and preferences that influence that writing, right? Like the little b bias. Big B bias is usually like typically on is typically on purpose. It could be like in a class setting, you can be biased in like these kinds of papers without knowing that you're being biased. But like an organization that's trying to, get you to support their company, and only, shows data for, their own company, or only shows a certain set of data that, is going to influence you to support them, even if like there's other data out there. That's bias. A news station that only reports, news a certain way. We've never seen that happen, right, guys? That's bias with a big B. So you want to stay away from bias with a big B. And when you're starting with that thesis statement and you're invested in it, or you're starting with that opinion and you're invested in it and you're not open, that's bias. So it also gives you kind of a shallow understanding of the issue. Because you just don't have time. Like your paper's due in a couple hours. You just don't have the time to invest in really learning very much about the issue. Which, really sucks because it does like undercut the point of doing it in the first place. And you really just end up reporting what others are saying. We talked about the goal, especially in academic research, especially once you get into like college and beyond. The goal is no longer just to report back what other people are saying. It's to really be analytical and critical and thinking and contributing and pushing the conversation forward. And you can't push the conversation forward if you haven't heard what's already existing in the whole conversation. So inquiry is a little bit different because the goal isn't just to hunt for black and white answers or like find stuff that supports a thesis statement. And it does let you do a little bit of risk taking. You start with the way scholars do it. Like they have an interest, and it kind of gets into the next one. It's led by their own curiosity, and they take risks. Like they start with a question or a goal. They might have a hypothesis, and they leave some wiggle room for that to change because you don't know what research you're really gonna find. Like you may have to make adjustments in the process and take some risks. And when you're doing something like this, you have to kind of recognize that there's always something more you can know because, again, like the unending conversation and things continue to keep going. People continue, there's new events and new studies, and people continue to add their own thoughts and concerns. New laws come out. It's always moving. And there's room for multiple answers and multiple perspectives. A lot of times, you'll find that even where there's different perspectives, there's almost always like shared concerns and multiple ways to go about something. So it leaves room to explore everything in the conversation, all the concerns, the good, the bad, the ugly, everything. And be able to analyze and criticize and evaluate what is good, what is bad, what is ugly. And to do some genuine research, to go to a lot of different places and gather a lot of information and get new questions and push that being able to ask critical questions, which is again like one of those skills involved in critical reading. So when we're thinking about why do this instead, for a lot of reasons. First, you establish and get and practice like processes and methods that are closer to like real world research rather than the traditional classroom research, which you've probably done a lot of and will probably have to do in the future. But it lets you do that active investigation yourself of being led by questions rather than a thesis statement, led by curiosity and trying to problem solve and look at a complex issue without a single right answer and be able to weigh some things and have time to do that and have more complex learning outcomes. And especially like personal responsibility for, it's your project, it's your research. And also having independent inquiry and research habits that are transferable to someplace outside of the classroom. And to also have some opportunities to really understand something about the issue and about the whole conversation, to really have the time to do that, to, learn something, and be able to evaluate and compare different sources and opinions with less bias, because we're, again, like in less of a rush, like rather than like just cherry picking to get that through information to get that one-sided argument, going to www.imright.com. So what you get there is, that incomplete and that cursory look at the issue. So, keep in mind, I would say this a lot, and I am, you can't refute what you didn't read. So you have to read everything. All right, so everybody, I would wager everybody has actually done some real inquiry in your own life, because you get on the Google and you type stuff in and you look stuff up, and real inquiry and research looks a little bit more like this. You think some, you read some, you ask a new question, you find a new source, and then you maybe find some more sources and ask some new questions and talk about some things and adjust your question. Have you ever been on the internet maybe I don't know, 11 p.m.? Because that's when, it happens the most. And you're on social media and you notice someone shared an article or shared, an event, something, and you're like, oh, I didn't know that happened. That's interesting. You click on it because clickbait. And you're reading through it and you're like, oh, I didn't know that happened. You click on something because, there's hyperlinked everything to get you into, all these all this spider webbing. So you go to a new place and you're reading, you're like, oh, I didn't know that. And you click on it, you go somewhere else, and you end up at Wikipedia, because all internet roads lead to Wikipedia eventually. And then you're reading through it, and all of a sudden it's 2 o'clock in the morning and you're reading a Wikipedia page about vampires and you're not sure how you got here. Maybe that's never happened to you. It happens to me all the time. And that's actually a little more like real research, because you're following questions, going to a new place and asking a new question, and you're following your curiosity rather than just trying to support a point. And how this kind of fits together, I want you to think about, it's easy to forget the skills that we said we were going to work on this semester, the rhetorical knowledge, knowledge of conventions, composing processes, critical reading, critical reflection, our big umbrella writing and research skills. I want you to think about the inquiry project and some of the other work we do as the platform we're going to use to work on these skills. So it's kind of how they're related. The inquiry project is a tool, and the focus is the skills and what it is allowing us to practice. So I'm going to give you some tips for developing this inquiry question. So if you're thinking about that model, the model conversation we looked at using the violent video games in teens, the one we just looked at, what don't you think about when you're looking at that conversation is in the middle, there was the actual topic of conversation, the violent video games. That's what we're doing right now in Unit 1, just trying to figure out what the topic of conversation is going to be. In the next unit, when we're working on the annotated bibliography, your goal will be to try to research and establish and hear out all of the voices, the scholars, the professionals, the people with personal experience, all the different kinds of texts that are out there, sharing these opinions and data and everything, and hear out the whole conversation and try to become as much of an expert as possible in just what is being said. The digital essay is where you will try to take a seat at the table and contribute something. You've heard everybody out. You said, hey guys, what are you talking about? And you've heard everybody. Is to then analyze and evaluate and talk about and say something, to speak into the conversation and add something to keep it going. So I'm going to give you some tips just to help you with this Unit 1 thing, just deciding what the conversation is going to be about. Oh, sorry, I jumped way ahead. So first, we're going to look at we're going to do a couple of things to try to get this topic together. Good inquiry doesn't just happen out of thin air or in a vacuum. Topics do that. I could say pick a topic, and you might say education or medicine or healthcare or immigration. But that doesn't necessarily in and of itself imply a problem or a debate or something that needs to be solved. you want to get down to where you have an issue. Like if I said education, it's a topic. Standardized testing, now there's a debate. That's something to talk about. And these things are usually framed by conversations. And real inquiry typically begins with some kind of a source or several sources that really help you like establish and clarify a direction to go into. Because one of the big things about choosing an inquiry question is you need to be able to say what it is you're trying to figure out about this issue. And it's really hard to do that if you don't know anything. So there typically is some reading and discussion that even has to happen first. And, you know, the ideas we pull out can often be vague, but, you know, text really help you clarify things. And of course it stems from genuine curiosity. You want to pick something you really won't be painful for the next couple of weeks, or sorry, for the next couple of months. So this is our list of banned, what I call banned topics and like cautionary tales. It's a pretty long list. I like to see people research new things, and one of the good, you know, ways to pick a topic is to pick something either you're genuinely interested in or something you're involved in already. It's really interesting to see people pick issues that are involved in the major that they're in already or thinking about choosing. Some people have been able to use this project to be useful and help them with help them make decisions about their major or come up with things they're going to be able to use in the future. So that's always helpful, or at least something that you're interested in, you know? But a lot of the topics on this list are things that either they're cautionary tales because people just have really, really struggled with these in the past, or they're just way too superficial. They've been done and done and done and done and done and done. And the research around them is really difficult because most of the things that you have to sift through are superficial. And things that people have all heard before. It's really hard to find something with these issues. It's hard to find something to say that's new, that really is complex and doesn't just sound like you're repeating stuff everybody has already heard before, you know? So I'm going to go through this list. I'm going to make this list available on Canvas as well. But I want to go through it here now because you're going to start your brainstorming. So first, abortion. No. Nature versus nurture. No. Nature versus nurture. It's always both. The answer is always both. And the degree to which it is being informed by nature versus nurture depends on the issue, you know. Smoking bans. Comparisons of religion, because in order to do that, you would have to begin with, I don't know, a list of all of the religions that have ever existed. Because when you're comparing, you're really trying to evaluate those religions. So you'd have to include like all of them, and that would take way too much time. Evaluative comparisons, not just religion, but I'm also adding like when you're comparing just two things, like Mac versus PC. Eating disorders as a main focus. Eating disorders do often come up in other topics, and that's fine. But as a main focus, it typically just ends up being a report on different kinds of eating disorders, which most people are, again, already aware of. Tattoos in the workplace. Stem cell research, unless you can make it like super current. I actually should have moved the stem cell research over here, and I didn't, so that was my mistake. It's more of a cautionary tale, like you just have to get more specific and more current. There has to be something happening right now with it. Capital punishment, the existence of God, life after death, the reliability of criminal investigations. That doesn't mean you cannot inquire into / criticize, question our criminal justice system. But when people start getting into the reliability of criminal investigations, it almost always ends up as like just a series of case studies of different people who had problems and no like connecting factor. Student or professional athlete pay. I'm sorry, my video is a little bit like slow and like choppy and glitchy today, and I don't know why. Lowering the drinking age, because we've all heard the reasons. Changing the driving age. Same-sex marriage. Other LGBTQ issues are allowed, except for same-sex marriage. Euthanasia and or assisted suicide. Conspiracy theories. I mean, like 9/11, Tupac, is the Illuminati real? The ugh. Um, restrictions of dangerous pet breeds. Because, like, people will want to look into, like, well, are pit bulls really dangerous? And it always sounds the same. Like, I have a pit bull and it's nice, you know? Um, evolution versus creationism, drug use of any kind regarding sports, concussions in football, the reality of witchcraft. Seriously, it wouldn't be on this list if people hadn't tried it before. Fitness. Now, I don't mean health. Health related questions are typically really interesting and really, really successful because it's a huge topic of conversation. But please, when I say fitness, I mean, I do not, and no one else, I feel like in this class, and it's really also really superficial because I could like Google it and get like a whole page or 15 of results, a how-to guide on how to get in shape. Because it again, it's just superficial. It's a list of like what supplements I should be taking, what exercise I can do to tone my abs. None of that. Here are the things that are cautionary tales. And again, I should have included stem cell research on this, and I forgot to move it over. But unless you can present a very like probative plan for research and you can really narrow it in on something current and specific, don't do it. Okay, you need to run it by me. Okay, is stress and college. I have had one, I think, really successful project on this, but I've had a lot of projects that really struggled to do more than say, you should manage your time better and get more sleep and do your homework and don't go to parties, young lady. That kind of stuff. The impact of social media on teens. Again, you got to narrow it in on something. Same thing with screen time, impact of screen time. There's so many different kinds of like things that count as screen time with so many different problems and ways they can impact you. Air pollution, immigration. Again, there's lots of things you can do with immigration that are super current, but you got to focus it in on like something like really current that's happening right now. Global warming, texting and driving. Again, like you can maybe make it work, but you really got to come up with like something new. Legalization in marijuana, gun control, healthcare, online bullying. So these are things that are kind of cautionary tales. They've been really difficult to do as opposed to the things that are just straight up no's. And so and again, we'll keep coming back to this. It will be available in one of our first activities, actually, with our second studio activity. And then you'll also be able to find it, elsewhere on Canvas. I'm going to give you some tips now on picking an LOI, not a topic, and kind of how to narrow it in. So the first thing is just think about how topics, issues, and what I'll call like lines of inquiry or your inquiry questions are different. One, topics are just used to, group issues together, like healthcare, medicine, education. And again, these don't necessarily imply a conversation or a debate or a problem in and of themselves. That's when you narrow it down to issues. Like there are lots of things like healthcare is kind of more of a topic. You could think of a lot of issues happening right now in the debate over healthcare. Your inquiry and what you pick describes what you want to understand or find out about that issue. So I'm going to give an example that goes from like general topic to specific topic or issue to your actual like focus, interest, question. So like education is a topic. Standardized testing, that's an issue. Thinking about how standardized testing impacts learning, that's a focus, that's a direction, that's something you're trying to figure out. So here are some things you want to think about when you're choosing what I'll sometimes call your LOI, your line of inquiry or your inquiry question. Is it answerable through research? Like it's not philosophical or values or preference based, like which religion is better. Again, like it's based on everybody's personal values. You're not going to be able to find like concrete research on that. Why do people prefer a certain type of music? Because they like it. Now I'm not saying you can't do inquiry questions or lines of inquiry about religion. I've had lots of really successful projects on religion, but when you start getting into comparisons, it really is about people's values. Can you explain why the issue matters? So you should be able to say, and that's part of what makes it current, like being able to say like why this matters now, like why this is worth looking into. Kind of that, why should I care kind of a thing. Is it debatable or complex enough? You don't want something that's a fact hunt or something that's oversimplified or dualistic. So you want to stay away from like yes or no questions or for or against or right or wrong. Like should people do this? That's a yes or no. There's not very much. That's going to set you up to have that like I guess oversimplified is the best way to say, or that superficial look when we were talking about looking at that whole conversation and hearing all those voices out. Like if I looked at the standardized testing example, if I said, does standardized testing impact learning? That kind of sets me up for a yes or no. But if I worded it, how does standardized testing impact learning? That opens up the whole gambit. You want something that is going to be very open and inclusive of a lot of different things, because that's actually going to set up your mindset a little bit better to have a little bit less bias. And you want to make sure it's, again, current and relevant. So it's not something that you're going to bore people with, it's something that's old. And can you say something new about it? So some of the topics that are on the list are things like, like abortion and, legalizing marijuana and global warming. Like these are things that, again, they're over talked about and over researched, and there's not new stuff coming out to match how often they're talked about. So if you Googled it, you get 50,000 results and they'd almost all say the same thing. You want to stay away from topics like that. Is it limited and clear enough? So something that might be vague or too big, like, what is beauty? What is beauty? Like, we're talking about like physical beauty, like cultural standards of beauty here? What are we talking about? Like inner beauty? Like what's happening? A topic that might be too big is like, what's wrong with the public education system? Whew, there's so much going on with that question. One, get ready for a long semester, because that's too much. You'd have to like narrow that in. Two, you're also assuming there is things wrong with the education system, but you don't want to word your question in a way that's going to set you up to be biased from the beginning. What's wrong with the public education system, or what's wrong with our current healthcare system? That wording already sets me up to assume that there's something wrong. It already sets me up to go in a certain way or make certain assumptions. So you want to keep opinions out of the question. Why do people get tattoos? I can answer that question for you. Wait for it. They want one. That's it. They have a personal or a cultural value, and it's different for everybody, and you'd have to do like a whole global history of tattoos all over the world, and like nobody wants to read it. And then that's the end. So there's a couple of tips just to get you started. Make it something you want to do. Make it something that's simplified and current and interesting and unique. Pay attention to your wording. Make sure it's clear. Make sure it's not opinionated. It's not like yes or no and like oversimplified. And again, like you might not start there. You might just start with like your topic or something you want to word, and the wording takes some time and some reading. But these are just some tips to just be thinking about it as you're working on your wording and you're getting started and you're picking some stuff.